y'all doing? I can't hear you. How you doing? Good morning, everyone. My name is Pandora Thomas, and I'm honored to be the lead of the Permaculture and Social Equity team. In a minute, I'm going to actually show a video that we've created that we feel captures our process and design strategies well. But before I start with that, our team was not just placed in Marin City, we were actually invited into Marin City by an organization called Shore Up Marin and Ms. Terry Green. So I would like to start by bringing up Ms. Terry Green.
Good morning. So my name is Terry Green. I am co-director of Shore Up Marin. Shore Up Marin is a multicultural environmental justice coalition in Marin County, focusing primarily on Marin City and the canal. For the last 5 years, we have been the leaders in working in disadvantaged communities in the areas of emergency preparedness, flooding, sea level rise, hazard mitigation, climate adaptation, and much, much more. When it comes to community engagement, we have developed a model for how one can work successfully in a partnership relationship in communities like ours. First, you have to have a foundation based on mutual respect. Second, you have to have acceptance for the wisdom and knowledge and skills that the community brings to the table. Third, you have to have a commitment to community inclusion throughout the entire process in every level that you're working in. And fourth, you have to have a commitment to trust in the process, the people, and one another. This happened in working with the permaculture design team, P+SET. And for that, we are forever grateful. No doubt, designing our own solutions was an overwhelming, life-changing success. I'd like to thank Resilient by Design for funding Shore Up Marin, and the Marin Community Foundation for funding the community engagement process, because without that, we believe it would not have happened. I'd also like to thank the Rockefeller Foundation. But I'd like to sit down with them. I'd like to discuss how they can become the lead in modeling how to work with disadvantaged communities. Their funding can be better utilized under the direction of disadvantaged communities to transform the lives of the people for the better, and not for displacing the people, which really means death to the community. They can become a model. And I need your help. Anybody who knows how I can have an audience with them, please let me know. This is something that we really want to do. The Rockefeller Foundation, Resilient by Design, can be a model that speaks to upholding the principles of environmental justice for all people. And I believe once Rockefeller understands these principles, the lives of those living in disadvantaged communities will be a picture of hope, a picture of life for all the people everywhere. Thank you so much.
We're already experiencing these issues. We're already experiencing flooding. We're already experiencing displacement. We're dealing with all the fluctuation of weather patterns. We're dealing with the most vulnerable communities located adjacent to the shores having the brunt of the challenges. We're talking about everything from adaptation to mitigation to migration. What does it look like when you ask communities who have been historically underserved and mistreated, asking them to think about migrating? Can we avoid it? What does it look like? What does the development in the future look like? Resiliency planning, where their voices take the lead. We have, for the last year, been a part of the Resilient by Design Challenge, and it's an extraordinary challenge because what it's done is highlight the fact that the Bay Area is key to the future of resiliency planning. We visited and toured what they're dealing with and started to talk about what would it look like, community-led design.
You can imagine in the World War II era, the U.S. military kind of recruiting workers from, say, the American South, largely African American, person of color communities, and recruiting them to the Bay Area and having a shipbuilding community. And then once the war was over, those jobs disappeared, and you have these temporary settlements with inadequate infrastructure that where the individuals who were living there were unable to move anywhere within the county or the Bay Area, sometimes literally by law because of redlining and categorical exclusion of either lending policies or land access policies. Now, take that circumstance and bring it full forward to now with sea level rise and extreme storm events. You have these communities who have been chronically marginalized over time at the front lines of these chronic stressors as well as acute events.
We were looking at the way our cities were being developed, and we noticed that the ideas, the dreams, the visions of the community were not truly being represented. The community was often included in a community engagement process where their feedback was heard, but at best that feedback was maybe integrated into an already established design trajectory, but at worst that feedback was often completely disregarded, and it seemed like the developers and designers were sort of going through the motions of community engagement. This leads to all sorts of apathy, disinterest, NIMBY attitudes, and even outright obstructionism of design projects. This has been a problem for developers, and we tend to end up with designs for our city that just really don't meet a lot of needs.
What we're fighting even right now with our own Board of Supervisors, with our own Marin County Housing Authority, what they want to do is come in and tear down public housing. What they say is, oh, we'll leave a couple of them, and we have to have affordable housing. Affordability in Marin County, you could be low income, and the low income is like up to $110,000. Who makes that kind of money? So what you're really talking about doing is eliminating your poor people and your low income people in Marin City, which happen to be, unfortunately, mostly people of color. We know for a fact that there are developers waiting in the wings. Marin City is gold to them. 10 minutes from the Golden Gate Bridge. Come on now. You have folks that's driving in here all the way from Hillsburg. Bumper to bumper traffic. Don't you know they want to live here? You know, but we do too. The relationship that we have with the Permaculture Institute group, it's a real relationship. It's a relationship that says, you know, we care about your community, and we don't normally get that from groups. We don't get the sincerity that people really matter. And that's the difference that we have here.
It's really unlikely that any community ever got together, looked at a piece of vacant urban land and said, hey, you know what we need here? We need more market rate development. That's exactly what's going to make this a nicer place to live. And yet, that's typically what tends to happen. In fact, it's exceedingly rare that communities ever get to actually participate in the design of their place. We need to begin with the foundation of planning that is by the people and for the people. That can serve as a starting place where developers, designers, and agencies can come together and collaborate with the community from the beginning. This is something we might call a people's plan. And a people's plan is truly inclusive, where the needs of everyone are met with nobody left out. So how do we create a people's plan? Well, first, it begins with a community partnership process. Through that community partnership process, we begin to assess what the needs, capacity, and the existing knowledge of that community are. From there, in partnership with the community, we develop a capacity building and eco-literacy training. That training includes both design and eco-literacy information sharing, as well as the toolkit needed to then take the People's Plan after the training and continue it on in their community as long as needed. The next step is we begin to assess the place. We use maps and we iterate through a process where people are placing problems that they have seen in the community onto the maps. Looking at the problem assessment, we then develop a set of strategies that are perfectly matched to meet the problems of the place and also the needs of the community. We then go back to the maps and we begin to match the strategies to the problems. We iterate through this process over and over again with as many people as possible. We then take all of this and we enter it into a database. Once we have it in the database, we begin to see something like a heat map. Once we see a strong pattern emerge, we can move any set of strategies into a rationalization process. This will allow us to determine the efficacy and practicality of any set of strategies. We can then vet projects and move them forward to further development. For small-scale projects, that might look like the community picking up shovels, building out small-scale solutions that can be replicated over time. For larger scale projects, that might look like multi-agency collaboration where the community's role becomes advocacy for their own People's Plan to make sure that what they need is actually developed.
Once they learned several strategies, they took a map and they just started assessing the problems. Here are some strategies. But the level of rationalization actually had them probe a little bit deeper. I may have placed 7 bioswales in this one area, but does that make sense? Let's start to go a little bit deeper. So what does the site look like? Is the bioswale the best strategy? So again, equipping them with the same questions that we as designers use, and then deciding what information is still needed. Cost speculations, all of these things they will continue to do in the future. And then eventually, all of the assessment and all the strategies have come together to form the People's Plan. So now we have 6 sites throughout Marin City that's a combination of maybe 3 to 7 different strategies they've learned in each site that can be started with. These 6 sites are not the only site that will be included in the People's Plan. We've talked about how the People's Plan is not static. It will live forever. So once you get those 6 sites built, then you can discuss and start to build and adapt and change over time and add more.
To create a whole system plan for any community, we must first engage in a deep assessment of place. Marin City is a small unincorporated community in Marin County on the edge of Richardson Bay, an important ecologically rich arm within the San Francisco Bay Area. Like many communities along the shorelines of the bay, there are vital transportation corridors. In this case, the 101 freeway provides a commute between San Francisco and the North Bay. This freeway has flooded in recent years, causing partial and full shutdowns of the freeway. This has also shut down access in and out of Marin City along the only road that accesses the community. Marin City provides us a concise watershed container to work within, with an approximate surface area of 350 acres. Along the shoreline at the lowest laying lands, a shopping center and the 101 freeway were built on what was once a coastal marsh. Between these two sits the detention basin, which has been receiving excess silt from stormwater runoff. Its holding capacity has been diminished and it is in need of being dredged according to the draft Marin City Flood Drainage Study published in October 2017. At approximately 200 acres, the residential areas along the foot of the hillside are a combination of public housing projects, private developments, and original homes built by an African American community of shipbuilders and workers who traveled here during World War II for work and to serve our country. A community-based assessment has indicated that there are numerous and frequent flooding issues at a variety of scales throughout this area. At the top of the watershed, we have approximately 150 acres of unmanaged regrowth forest that has been established after clear-cutting during the early years of development of the Bay Area. During our preliminary assessment walks, we discovered unmanaged erosion gullies and numerous locations where silt, large biomass, and debris were passing into the storm drain system. The combination of an undersized, aging, and poorly maintained drainage system, poor siting of infrastructure in flood-prone areas, and increased frequency and scale of storm events along with high tides has resulted in the escalation of impact of flood events. To address these combined issues, we are proposing a set of distributed, small-scale strategies based upon best practices already established within low-impact development. The community partnered with the students of UED Lab at Yale University to create draft renderings to be used as a communication tool to take any of these projects to next steps. For example, the commissioning of biddable specifications. Each of the following 6 sites may serve as a showcase of strategies that can be replicated throughout Marin City. First, we have a retrofit of the Manzanita Community Center into a resiliency hub, complete with an intergenerational garden, large cisterns, disaster supplies, rain gardens, and solar power for emergencies. A daylighted creek extends from the community center down to Donahue along the edge of the school and into an infiltration basin that is also connected to a series of bioswales along Donahue. The detention basin at the shopping center can be retrofitted with raised boardwalks and enhanced ecologically for education and recreation. An expansion of its footprint and dredging will greatly increase the holding capacity. The corner of Drake and Donahue is a critical intervention point for flooding. Rain gardens and bioswales and open spaces will increase infiltration and holding while mitigating flooding in the street as well as enhance the beauty of the landscape. The erosion gullies behind Building 69 serve as a strategic point to begin a pattern of restoration all across the watershed. An existing heritage orchard can be restored and replanted for the community to enjoy. The First Missionary Baptist Church has been flooded more than once from an overflowing culvert. A diversion drain will direct water around the church while neighboring green spaces can become showcase examples of resilient homes.
The rest of the Bay Area is ready for the on-the-ground expertise and talent to be the guiding principle. Because no longer is this idea of only experts coming in to save us and save the Bay Area. Now it's the homegrown expertise partnering with, other experts. But again, starting with the homegrown people, living with these issues, experiencing them day by day. They now understand a lot of what I understand in a very short time. It's been very empowering and reiterating something that I know, ultimately, that we all are designers.
We can change the agency side and the government side and the corporation side to see the residents as creators and as equals at the table. And so the People's Plan is a perfect way to do that. And I can easily see the People's Plan being something that is a tool to help the community leaders here and throughout the Bay Area.
I feel like it's a passing of the baton, and it's time for my age group and my generation to really step up and, take control of Marin City and what our future is. If we don't do it, then what you see now may not be what in the next 10 years. It might be, not Marin City. So I feel like I have to step up and utilize my leadership skills to, fight back and make a change for the better.
One thing that has me thinking differently now is becoming one with the raindrop and thinking of how would this raindrop travel, where would it go, what would it do, what would it affect? And thinking like that, not just for now, but thinking about the future generations to come. How would this raindrop affect now and later? And then coming up with ways that would effectively capture that raindrop and put it to good use so that it doesn't cause damage now or even more damage later. To me, that was one of the most interesting things.
Slides or not. Did you like the video? Yeah. Thank you. I just want to give it up for David Cody from our team. He'll come up in a minute, who actually created that video. So I don't have any slides. Oh, there you go. So this is our beautiful team. It's been a privilege and an honor to work with such a diverse group of people who are so committed to community-led design. Our approach is rooted in this approach called permaculture design. Who's heard of permaculture? Let me see a show of hands. Okay, it's because it's the Bay Area. But permaculture is an ecological design system rooted in indigenous wisdom and knowledge that elevates ecosystem health while also meeting human needs. Doesn't that sound amazing? What we really appreciate about permaculture is that it's principle-based. So all of the strategies and solutions that you saw in the video, we had an 8-week course where the people that you heard speaking took part. They learned permaculture principles, and so them, along with our team, applied those principles to create the People's Plan. Another aspect of our approach, which was referred to in the video, is this idea of the CPP, the community partnership process. You start by listening to and elevating the assets of a community. Now, that process in Marin City created this 8-week course. That's what they decided they needed. They wanted to understand and create the solutions so that they could be the designers in the long run, and so that this people's plan would live in their community and they could change it and adapt it as needed. We are proposing the regional replication of this approach that starts with the assets of the community. Having an 8-week course may not be what other communities need, but if you don't start with their assets, elevating their leadership and their strength, then oftentimes what we design will not speak to them. So that's what we're proposing. How do we start with the CPP process, continuing it throughout the Bay Area to really have the on-the-ground leadership be at the forefront of sustainability moving forward? And in terms of speaking about elevating leadership and on-the-ground leadership, I want to bring out now one of the graduates. She's going to close it out from our class. Someone I can actually now call my dear sister friend with them cute glasses, Miss June Farmer.
Just as water is the foundation of life, it must also be the foundation of design in the built environment. My name is June Farmer. I'm a CX3 coordinator for Marin City. I am a resident of Marin City, and I am a part of the People's Plan. I must say that this training has allowed me to develop a greater understanding of Marin City. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I have heard many times that Marin City is shaped like a bowl, but never understood the significance until now. Because of the bowl shape of Marin City, the water flows from the perimeters of the bowl, which is the Golden Gate Regional Park Services, down into the town area where the churches, school, shopping center, homes, apartments, and the only entrance and exit into Marin City, causing these areas to flood. P+SET has been very instrumental in showing us how we can slow the water, spread the water, sink the water, and store the water, which would help eliminate some of the flooding through nature. Learning about brush plugs, swaddles, biowells, cisterns, rain gardens has allowed us to understand we don't need people coming in from who knows where to conduct another study costing $400,000. Learn from us and invest in us, the People's Plan. We mapped out areas that we know have flooding issues, standing water, erosions, and rodents. We even created owl houses to attract owls to eat the rodents. The Marin City People's Team will begin to work on designing our intergenerational garden. I am extremely excited about using permaculture techniques to design our garden, which would use the most efficient, effective, sustainable way to have success, such as terrace gardening, which will help prevent erosion, produce more vegetation, increase sustainability, and generate more availability for those who are handicapped. Our team's desire is to continue learning permaculture, keep strategizing cost-effective solutions for Marin City's flooding issues, and do whatever work we can do ourselves. When I learned that under the California law, you can shadow a lawyer and become a lawyer in 4 years, I asked if I can follow a permaculturalist to become a permaculturalist and a Pandora, said yes. Let's do it. Thank you for this time.
Thanks very much. I'd like to invite the whole team up for questions, and if the jury wants to go ahead and jump in, and I'm going to have little signs to tell you the timing.
Oh, good.
I know.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Shelley Putisha. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I used to live here, but I now live in Washington, D.C. Yeah, sorry, I know, the belly of the beast. But I know of Marin City, so this has been really wonderful to hear about. And I deeply appreciate the straight talk. I deeply appreciate the power of the People's Plan. And I would like to hear a little bit more about how you all think this approach and the idea of the People's Plan can become business as usual. How can it become a regular entry point for working with community?
It's a funny question because we should have a general planning process. We do in the state of California. We develop general plans on a regular periodicity, longer time cycles, and theoretically, we're a democracy, and those general plans should be people's plans, but they're not. And so one question that we've been wrestling with is how can we model this idea of people's planning in such a way that we can, over time, reinsert the ethic of actually participating with the population being served in a general planning process with the state of California. And we have some allies who have helped us think about that and made some introductions. And actually, after this process is over, we're going to have some of those conversations to see how that could actually happen over time.
Well, maybe there's a connection to what Ms. Green said at the beginning about philanthropy really supporting this as it becomes a practice that is regularized.
We need champions. Yesterday, I attended the Bay Area Community Regional Resilience Forum. That question was asked there as well. We have to have folks to really get rid of the fear, really begin to look at folks as we're all one. And when you begin to have that kind of dialogue, then that trust, that respect, all of that will take place. You know, I'm glad that now some folks within the state of California are looking at, wow, we have to do something differently. We have to have some mandates that comes from funders, funding sources, so they can then say to the organizations that are recipients of those funds, these are the things that you must do. And if that doesn't happen, things will be business as usual. But folks have to be willing to step out on faith and say, you know, the folks in the community are important and they have something to offer.
Thank you for that. And I guess I'm building off of Shelley's question as well, but maybe focusing back in Marin City. So loved the presentation and the whole idea of the plan. I think it's awesome. And I'm curious because there was some mention in the beginning about the fact that politicians are sort of looking at these higher tax bases that they could bring in from some of these other people. And when we talk about the People's Plan, it's really that sort of on the ground, really vulnerable populations. What happens within the process to bring some of these other folks along? How are they engaged in this? And then I have a second question of, once these pilot projects take off, I know you mentioned a little bit, Pandora, about the fact that there's a kind of assessment that starts to happen. I'm curious, how do you do that to justify that we didn't just check the box of having that community project, but that it actually is something that works, and sort of building the proof of concept to allow all the constituencies to support doing additional work?
Thank you for that question. Well, I'll start with first how we did it in the 8-week training. We had people come through the course, like the flood engineer, actually Chris Chu, watershed planner who's here. So instead of the community having to go to the town hall meetings, they actually came into Marin City and did a partnering process. So they were sharing what they were working on, the draft flood plan and other watershed plans, and then there was an engagement back and forth instead of just having it the other way, which is usually how it looks. Communities have to go and then kind of fight for what they want. This just erased that, and it really became the people in charge had to actually kind of explain what they were doing, and then the community got to probe a little bit deeper and understand more, and then we tried to model how you can advocate and what does it look like to start asking questions. And so we included that in our training. I would assume that that would be needed because that's the constant thing that came up. Like, we don't even know when meetings are. You know, I just got to give it up for Ms. Terry and June too, because they be showing up, but it's like a full-time job to show up and be present for all of this. So that piece of whether it's starting with, if it's like church groups or classes, and then bringing more of the politicians and the people that have some more of the power to that space instead of vice versa. And your second question?
What to do once the projects get implemented? How does the assessment process work so that it could be valid not just to those folks on the ground who are involved in creating it, but all up and down the chain of stakeholders?
So there's something to the scale of the project. So when we see these small scale, replicable projects across the watershed, that will take time, community building them out, and we can measure effects later. As the projects start to scale up, they sort of necessitate interaction and partnership with all the other agencies involved. Some of these things like bioswales on Donahue can't be just done by the community, right? And so it's that point where there's so much literacy in the community built up and leadership in the community built up that it's the partnership process gets a lot better, I think, for all sides. And so we're not just checking the boxes, we're doing the projects with all of the agencies that need to be involved.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Really exciting. So I feel I understand the basic principles of the people's planning process and the where you are right now. And I'd love to hear what the ideas are for the people's clienting process. So as you're moving to commission some of these, so you know, I understand that the concept is some are shovel ready. If you want to, you could do a working party one Saturday for some of the smaller projects, but say the upgrading of the community center and the creation of the intergenerational garden, for example, that might need to be tendered. How do you continue this process of empowerment, like absolute empowerment, absolute collaboration through to that clienting process?
When it comes to the intergenerational garden project, we've already secured some funding for that to happen. And we'll continue to look for some additional money. But when it comes to some of the other larger projects, we are definitely in need of resources. And so we plan to just continue to go to those with the funding to say, come on, let's do this. This is going to benefit everyone.
And Ms. Green, will Shore Up Marin act as the fiscal sponsor for the project? So Shore Up then becomes the lead client that holds those relationships?
Yes, Shore Up Marin is definitely the lead on this. We have been working with this for a number of years, and we will continue to do so. And it was great when we had folks from the Department of Public Works come, from the third district flood zone come to the meetings. We've had economic specialists come. It was just so refreshing to have those people come to our meetings. But even before that, because we've been working this, when it came down to looking at the issues of flooding in Marin City, folks had all kind of thoughts. I mean, they had their own thoughts about what was happening in Marin City and had never set foot in the community. And so when we had some tours, they came and they looked and they were like, wow, water's coming from here, it's coming from there. They couldn't believe it. And so even, you know, and it took, unfortunately, it took the 101 freeway to have to be shut down several times for us to get some recognition that there's flooding that exists in Marin City. But we do have to continue, because even the flood study that we had done only took into consideration the lower part of Marin City. It didn't look at all the water flying down the hill and how houses are now lopsided. It didn't look at that, so we have to address that as well. And that's something that we will be going to the Board of Supervisors. Thank God for the transportation folks who helped to fund that. We'll go back to the 3rd District flood zone meetings. We have to look at Marin City in its entirety, and then you begin to make your recommendations from there.
And one other piece of that, out of this class, so there was about 25 people that graduated, and in partnering with Short Marin, they kept meeting even after we had our class ended 2 weeks ago. They kept meeting because they want to think about, how do we learn the skills around implementation? So how do we understand, how do you start to measure out the sites, start doing bidding? They want to understand the contractor skills. Because of the 8 weeks in the short time, we only got to really, it was like an introduction really, but they're excited about going deeper and getting the skills and then having ownership. What would it look like if there was a cooperative company based in Marin City, built out of Short Marin, that actually could help equip other communities? And the county, Kate Sears, people like Lindy Lowe, they're now excited too. And they're like, we want to think about what does that look like, again, to support what all these people have been saying for years in Marin City and start to equip the folks on the ground. So that's a little bit of what it's starting to take shape.
So I think permaculture principles, I think, are very powerful, not only because they produce plans that reflect community priorities, but in the process, you build social capital, which has been clearly shown to be a major element of resilience. We saw it in Katrina. So I'm impressed with all that. As I look at what you've presented, it seems to me the strategies are designed primarily to deal with land-based forcing functions, major rainfall events, and less about ocean rise, sea level rise. And I wonder if you would comment on that, please.
Yes, thanks. That's a great question. I think this, one of the points that Ms. Terry made was this concern about flooding from above. This is a large watershed with steep slopes, and there's the pipe systems that are there are smaller than what's needed to manage the flooding. So it's an interesting thing when you look at the drainage plan that was done in 2017, because it focused mostly on the lower portion and didn't take into account one of the bigger near-term issues. Since 101 runs along the coast, and it's likely to raise at some point, there's going to be coastal management at that low point. And really then the issue for the community is figuring out how to address the flooding from above. Does that answer your question?
No, well, and I think you've done a good job of the flooding from above, but what about the inundation of a sea that will be more than 3 feet higher by the end of the century?
So the 101 acts as a barrier in the coastal area, and there's a culvert that, so there's tidal activity in the parking area, the shopping center, the low points. And essentially, over time, you'll have to deal with that exchange, but there's a hard edge where you can control flood management issues. It's going to exacerbate flooding in the low points, but that egress route, as we've talked about, is a major issue that has to be considered anyway. So really, for the community and for the kind of for the day-to-day nuisance and this kind of chronic flooding issue, a lot more attention has to be given to the upland, because the flooding risk and sea level rise is going to be addressed with infrastructure investment that's required for transportation function.
You saw a little bit about the 101 with the flooding, and I've lived in Marin City 69 years. So my parents came to work in the shipyards, and it's gotten worse due to sea level rise. So what happens when we have the major storm events, high tides, The water actually comes over the freeway into Marin City from the bay. The water comes under the freeway from the bay into Marin City. And then we have the water that's flooding down the hill, and it all merges together. So we definitely have to look at both.
Maybe I can follow up on that question. My name is Helle. I'm based in Copenhagen, so I really much appreciate this presentation and the community-led design process. Thank you so much for that. Really asking the people living in Marine City what they're experts in, which is their place and where they live. But I'm amazed also coming from Europe and looking at all these proposals actually, that there is a complete lack in this region on public infrastructure, public transportation planning. And I'm wondering, because the Highway 101 is so crucial for this community, if you can explain a little bit how the community-led design process can work as a mechanism to reach not only the city and the municipalities, but actually the regional level state. I guess it's a state-owned highway. Maybe it's even federal, I don't even know. But if you could tell a little bit about what your reflections about how the process can actually leapfrog or jump over, I guess, some of those jurisdictions or levels of planning, because I think that's where we need to innovate. Because there is, it's not, the community is not going to be served better and connect people to opportunity by elevating the highway, which is maybe going to be a solution in the future.
Well, one thing I can add is whereas the training and engagement with the community is building capacity on existing skills, experience, knowledge, resources, it's also adding advocacy literacy. And so part of the training we focused on even understanding the jurisdictional landscape and kind of decision-making mapping. How do decisions get made, both in the near term and in the long term, and equipping the community with additional literacy to be able to engage, to advocate for strategies that help actually honor their needs while those larger long-term infrastructure projects are in development. So that's a piece of it. And I think it's also maybe self-evident to all the groups here that we do need to innovate on multi-jurisdictional collaboration in the long run. We have some broken pieces in the way the built environment emerges, and we have some ideas around that informed by permaculture principles and community input, but I can't stand here and tell you exactly how it's going to look in a 10, 20, 30-year time frame.
I just want to add that the projects, they're real projects, but they're more than that. They're a means to an end. And the end is not just community engagement, but true leadership in the community. Imagine if the planning meeting happened with Caltrans or whoever the agencies are involved, and a huge swell of people showed up to participate, and how that would transform these processes. So building a movement, building resiliency and relationships and trust within the community so that they actually have that strong foundation to show up. That is that capacity expansion, the movement building. So I just wanted to add that.
Not just having them show up, but actually show up with ideas so that they can be in conversation and they can understand, oh, this is what you're proposing. We've discussed it. We have an alternative. We can meet in the middle. So that level, elevating that level for them to show up. Yes, June, go ahead.
The one thing that we do know as residents of Marin City, even if you lift the highway, elevated everything, it does not stop the flooding in Marin City.
Sorry, I just want to reinforce what I see as the value in part of the permaculture education as an empowering tool, because the 101 is a big infrastructure piece that actually, in some ways, cuts Marin City off from divides it off from the bay. There's an egress route issue. There's one egress and it floods. And that egress is a critical concern for this community. And there's flooding that happens from behind. So in a sense, the 101 is a bigger infrastructure project for a community that's a much smaller community that faces development pressures. So in a sense, the permaculture course taught community members and educated them about the notion of the watershed and the whole idea of how their system is functioning from the top of the watershed to the bottom, and also for flooding and sea level rise over time. And also empowered them to recognize that they can seek or develop strategies at the local scale that can insert or create feedbacks or fill in this gap between large-scale infrastructure investment and local action and local activity. So I think that gap is critical for, for setting up a participatory role for the community in taking advantage and also guiding these kinds of development projects so they actually are part of the community development and community and introduce aspects to the community that otherwise that allow them to function locally within the funding from a large infrastructure investment.
Wow, I was quite impressed that you were invited in by Shore Up. I think that's an incredible action, in that you then developed the People's Plan, and then you followed up, and I think the guidelines, the illustrated guidelines were new. I hadn't seen that before, and I was really impressed by that, and how it began to show these demonstration projects. And the fact that you're now thinking about taking this, using it as a model, and going regionally with this whole model. Can you, have you been invited into other places as you were invited into Marin City?
Yes. Well, again, many of us have been doing this work in the Bay Area. So I do just want to recognize part of why we were invited in is because Urban Permaculture Institute had a reputation. I've been doing some permaculture design with diverse communities, and so there was an understanding that our approach would speak to Shore Up Marin and Ms. Terry's approach, and also being a part of the environmental justice community, which a lot of the environmental justice principles mimic permaculture principles. So we've been asked by the Resilient Communities Initiative, and actually the group in East Oakland was really excited when they heard, because they're like, we would love to be able to partner with the design group the way you all are partnering, and even the design group was excited. There was a few other organizations, they have different names, but in Vallejo, we've been asked if we can come out, but not so much lead, but I think what's really attractive is that people feel like they will be seen, and so how can we go and just help to kind of map out what's already there for them, and then help to define moving forward what that would look like. So almost more of a facilitated conversation process, rather than just us going in and only leading, if that makes sense. Did I say?
Oh, one thing.
Hank, can't answer?
I wanted to respond to your question. And I want to leave everyone with this. Clearly, the community needs to be resourced. There's no doubt about that. But what we need is folks like you all sitting in the room right now, because you have contacts that we don't have. We need you to take the kind of, what can I say? It's almost like if I grab Amanda's hand, or Amanda comes and grabs my hand, and she says, come on, Terry, I want to introduce you to Jerry. Because Jerry has something that you need. Amen. This is what we need. When I talk about champions, we need folks to be able to just get up out of your comfort zone, do something different, embrace these communities like ours in Marin City and several others, and say, you know what? I know people that can help make a difference. We need you all to do something different because you have contacts. We don't have those contacts. But you can be a help, and you can be a part of the life and vitality of communities like ours, not only in Marin City and the Canal, but in communities in the region as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We'll now go to a brief break. We'll be back here at 11:15. Can the teams, the Common Ground team and the Big One Sherwood team, come down to get mic'd to get ready for the next presentations? And we'll be back and ready to go at 11:15. Thank you.